Hello, everyone. This podcast is brought to you by Card Academy. Please check them out for all of your needs with singles and with card supplies. Welcome. I'm Michael, and I'm joined today by our team members Melanie and Jessi. And we're going to be talking about what makes Weiss Schwarz a unique game. And so I'm just going to be rambling for a little bit on an introduction to this because if you play Weiss Schwarz, you'll know that it's kind of an odd duck, right? Some people have said that it's kind of like flipping coins. Some people have thought that it's kind of close to Magic the Gathering. So, with this discussion, we're going to be trying to delve into all these different parts of the game to see, in what ways is WS kind of similar and what ways is it different, and so on. Now, you'll see in the link below, we've put a little infographic together about all the different things that that a few card games have. So we have side by side Weiss Schwarz. In the middle we have Magic, and on the right we have Hearthstone. Now, if you play these games, and admittedly, probably a lot of us do, in some capacity, or at least have heard of them, and we can extend that discussion to include other things: Vanguard, Buddy Fight, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, that kind of thing. But we just chose these three because, well, admittedly, for the for those of us that put this together, it's the card games that we are most familiar with. So, going through each of these games has a common objective, right? Get somebody to a certain level or a certain life total, that kind of thing. There's a card pool that's involved. There's a deck that you use. There's a number of cards that you have to have in your deck. There's a hand size limit. There's a number of cards that you get access to per turn. There's a level of interaction. There's the increments that you have to take to win. There's a discard pile, resource like mana or stock. And the last part that we put were notes. Now, just going through this, right? If we look at Weiss Schwarz, the objective is to get our opponent to level 4. The card pool is at least 8,500 cards, at least for those of us that are playing the Japanese side of the game. For the sake of argument, we're going to be talking mostly about the Japanese part of the game, though, I mean, arguably, there will be some room for discussion there, I'm sure. The deck is closed info in that we never get to look at our deck unless an effect tells us to. We need to have at least and at most 50 cards in our deck. There is a hand size of 7 at the end of turn. We get 1 plus 2 cards per turn. The interaction in WS is minimal. The increments that we take to win are actually not known until we check them. That's why we have a little Schrodinger there. Discard pile is open and also used very often. Getting your resources is not necessarily guaranteed, and its notes are strictly forbidden. Now, we can contrast this to Magic and Hearthstone, which you'll see side by side, and for the sake of timeliness, we're not going to go through these. We'll let you look through them and just take some notes on, mental notes that is, on what it is that these games might have in common and might not. But we admit that this is a very narrow sample, and the difference, there's so many differences and nuances uh, that we can go into, but the point is we just want to be able to scratch the surface on some of these things. And one of the biggest questions that have come up is how we compare typical deck archetypes in WS to those that we might see in other games. So for those that might not know, there are kind of this large nebula, if you will, of deck types that we might see in Magic and Hearthstone. For instance, Tempo, which focuses on just being that extra turn ahead or 2 or 3 of your opponent to secure a win. Aggro, which just wants to burn your opponent's face to the ground. Combo, which just kind of wants to look really cool and then just win in one turn. And Control, which wants to tell your opponent as much as possible, no, you can't. Sorry, no, no, no. Until eventually says, yeah, yes, I win, right? So, like I said before, we have our team members, Melanie and Jessi. Both of them have competed at the nationals level. In fact, all three of us have. But if anybody wanted to, I guess, throw credibility into the question, there we go. Every one of us here has been to nationals and competed at a very high level. So, woo. Melanie, you were the one that posed this question to us. So, in your experience, how would you compare the typical deck archetypes that we have listed here, Tempo, Aggro, Combo, and Control, to those in WS?
so this becomes a little tricky in that I'm pretty sure all these deck types exist, but there's two that are than the other two. With combo, this is not a game that you really quote unquote win in one turn unless you've leveled up to level 3 and then you have a deck that has really strong finishers that literally deal so many instances of damage. At that point you can pretty much guarantee a win in most situations. Nisekoi, well, not anymore, but it might have been in the case. I'm going to just throw out To Love Ru Darkness Yami, Yami 2.0 RL from Puyo Puyo with a +2 soul. The list could go on, and there are other sets that actually could get added to that too, very much so. But it's kind of hard to have a combo deck in a game that actually you have to build up levels to get there. But I suppose that could be said of other combo decks. So it's not totally gone. It's just not as so much of a thing. Aggro, to me and Weiss, is characters that usually wall up and get lots of attack power. Sets that can put up really big walls, like Girlfriend Beta, Love Live can do that, just as a few small examples. These sets can kind of put together a really, really strong wall that can prevent your opponent from being able to power over and leaving you with more resources in hand to do more later in the game. Schoolgirl Strikers, early impressions seem to be very much in line with that. Attack on Titan if you're running the Titan, or even sometimes the core build can also fall in that category. Sword Art Online also, especially on the English side of the game, was kind of really known, especially early on, for its aggro heavy, like Asuna and Prison Queen wall that you could get on your opponents. Control in Weiss is a little trickier because we actually have less ways to interact with our opponent. Like, to compare, in Magic, you can actually interact with your opponent and what they're trying to do on like both of their what you would call main phases. In Weiss, you can't do that. In Weiss, there's pretty much only one specific time that you can kind of react to your opponent in the counter step, and that's only if they front attack a character. And a lot of our, while we have some pretty powerful counters that can control the game and deny certain effects, and we're slowly getting more in the shape of even a new event that was spoiled this evening for the To Love Ru second set. I feel like that with control, it's a little trickier in Weiss because, yes, you can control and deny and get around certain effects, but this is very limited to a very, very small window of opportunity, whereas most control players from other games would be used to being able to interfere or kind of make a presence known and deny throughout an entire opponent's turn.
All right. So we have an interesting we have an interesting situation here because Jessi, I understand that WS is your first card game. So how do you feel about this question? Because I know that you might have branched a little bit into other card games, but given that WS was your first card game, what did these kind of descriptors of decks mean to you in the whole scope of things? Do they seem very different to you, or do they seem I guess perhaps more or less applicable?
I think that it's a little bit of both, probably, because different decks seem to have different strategies to win. And I actually get this question a lot from players learning the game, especially coming from games like Magic. And they say, I'm a control player, what would you recommend I try? And usually my answer is like, I don't know, Conquer, in English you can't salvage. And we kind of have an anti-damage counter. It sort of works. So I think that rather than archetypes in Weiss, it's better to kind of think about strategies. Like, are you going to +2 soul? And to me, that's more like an aggro deck in Weiss, because you're just throwing damage out there. If it sticks, then awesome. And you just kind of go until you don't go anymore. To me, tempo would be like a deck that charges a lot of stock, so that, one, you're compressing, so you're canceling a lot and getting ahead of your opponent there, and you're also able to pull off bigger things sooner, theoretically.
Yeah, so that actually brings us into our next point, because I like that you mentioned the plus 2 soul, because, like you say, if you're playing plus 2 soul, then, if it sticks, great. If it doesn't, oh well. And this is something that is, again, a unique facet of WS, right? And that damage is not certain until you check it, right? We don't know until we measure it. And so what I want to ask both of you is, what do you like about the damage system? Do you think it's better or worse than other card games? So Jessi, you're up first with this one. Do you like the fact that damage is not certain, and do you think it's better or worse?
I do like it because it adds, a certain amount of excitement to the game. Probably the second game I'm most familiar with is Vanguard, and something that I don't like about that game is you only have 4 cancels, so to speak, 4 heal triggers, and the likelihood of you being able to do something about a point of damage is, depending on what deck you're playing, not that great. If you take that damage, you just take it. And I really like that you can manipulate your deck so that if somebody's hitting you for 6, you're hopefully not going to take 6.
Melanie, thoughts?
I tend to like it too for that similar reasons. It lends some unpredictability to the game. I think that it also makes you think and strategize a lot more, because it's not set in stone. You kind of have to plan how you're going to attack, and you have to consider what's going to stick, what's going to cancel. You have to kind of consider, okay, what triggers are left in my deck? And you have to also consider what's left in your opponent's deck. And then, there are those moments that I guess our locals tend to use the term, Weiss happened.
Oh, yeah.
Where stuff damage, for example, they swing for 6 and it sticks, and you're just sitting there like, well, and you're looking at your deck going, there's 8 climaxes in there, and I have 10 stock. I don't know what's going on right now. But in a more serious note, I kind of like how the system works, because I feel like it requires you to think a lot more and strategize a lot more with your deck and your attacks. And I also like it because I feel like with this damage system, it keeps a lot more things viable in the format that would not necessarily be viable. Mm-hmm. Some of the older sets that maybe are lacking some of the newer tech and some of the newer stuff, but somebody can still show up and play with those sets and still have a chance. It may not be as statistically high a chance, but because of the way the damage system works, it allows for some of that stuff to still be viable.
Yeah, a friend of mine once told me, in a Magic tournament of all places, anybody can beat anybody. Don't worry about it. And I think that kind of little adage holds even more true, if it's possible, in this game than in others, in that everybody really does get a fair shot at winning a given game, no matter how, quote, good or bad their deck might be. But so here's another question for you then, because we mentioned card pool, and just as a preface, right, in Hearthstone we just heard about the introduction of a standard and a wild format where certain sets would be cycling out, and you would be able to play everything in the wild format all the time, and only the newest sets in standard. Now, Magic, of course, we have standard, we have even block constructed, we have modern, we have legacy, vintage, that kind of thing. So it's very, very structured. But with WS, right, we have Neo Standard, which is actually everything. You're only limited to using one series. And there's standard, which is where, you can use everything across every set that's there. Do you think that WS would be better off with a kind of rotational system where only a certain number of sets are available for use in a I guess a more, quote, recent standard format? Or do you think that the Neo Standard and the Neo Standard format is good as it is? Melanie?
I was actually drawn to this game because
of the fact that if I bought a set, I could continue to play it. I realize as a player, and if you play in Weiss long enough, you do realize that sets do sort of kind of get power creeped out. Not totally, because the way damage is dealt, and because some strong sets are just going to always be strong. But for the most part, I feel like it's kind of nice to be able to pull out my Little Buster set, which is, dates back to the launch of the game and has gotten support over the years, and be able to still play with one of my favorite animes, with one of my favorite characters, and just kind of have some great games and enjoy. I could see an argument for perhaps instead of, using a ban list or restricted list that, we might go to some kind of rotation, but I feel like a lot of the value in Weiss is that you get to keep your cards and they are always playable. Unlike other games where, you get stuck with cards and you have to, you have to sell them at the right time or let go of them or watch the market very closely, or you can potentially end up being out quite a bit of money or not being able to afford or buy into the next set. I think that I do want to mention this here just briefly before I pass this question along, but it seems like with Bushiroad this year, they've introduced something new to the game called power-up sets. And I'm actually really excited to see how this product kind of pans out and continues going forward. Weiss is kind of going through some growing pains at the moment, where there are a lot of older sets that need a little bit of help, but they don't necessarily need a full-on booster set. And I'm kind of really excited that they're introducing these power-up sets, because I feel like it's going to help make some of the older sets a little bit more viable and level the playing field.
And I'm sure that retailers will also have a better time with that, because before, if you remember, the only kind of, quote, power-up set that we might get just came in the form of promo sets. And those can be, very difficult to get. You'd have to redeem them. And I think it's a welcome change that they're actually going to, put together a little package so that people can actually buy them, as opposed to having to go through great lengths to try to redeem points for them, rather. So.
Well, and I'm thinking that they're reacting a little bit to some of the statistics that they gathered at the end of this current Nationals, Regionals, World Grand Prix season, in that they saw that they published 2 comeback campaigns in August. They released the promo packs alongside 2 extra boosters so that people here over in the States and other places would have easier access to those comeback campaign promos, instead of them getting bought out really fast at the point stations and not being able to be over here in the US in time for the season by points exchange. So I think we're seeing, though, that about 4 to 5% of people were not only just like entering and playing with these decks, but were actually topping with them. And just because they gave them an extra 10 cards to their card pool, and that people were responding and playing with this, and it's kind of like the player base saying, hey, give our older sets a little bit more support. We want to play them. And I'm hoping that they'll kind of take that data and keep using that.
Jessi, your thoughts on the rotation versus versus the open Neo standard?
I agree with Melanie. One of the things that I do like about the game is that there is no rotation. I got sold a Magic standard deck right before rotation one time, and I didn't know about rotation. It was really sad. So obviously, that kind of left me with a bad taste in my mouth. But I can understand why in games like Magic it's necessary. I think that I agree. One of the things that I always tell newer players, you can play whatever set, even if it's older. They might release a comeback campaign or like the new a power-up set for it, and then it might be super viable. So, go to town. Something that I've always thought would be really interesting, not necessarily maybe a competitive format, but a fun format, would be kind of a vintage format where it's not an eternal format, but only older cards can be played. Kind of like, to me, like pre-Conquest meta, just exploring the 8 gates, all heals kind of life.
I don't know about that. That could be all very interesting. I mean, I think one of the reasons that they printed those cards was to try to avoid those games going on forever. At least this is what I've heard, is that you would have games that would take at least an hour, and
Oh,
that's why we
absolutely.
have some of the cards on the ban list, just to prevent that from happening. I think one of the things that Bishira did at least try to do was speed up the pace of games to avoid those, hour and a half long grinds of trying to, well, just finish it. But no, I think that would be an interesting thing to explore, maybe as kind of maybe an unofficial format. But um, so with those things in mind now, uh, we know that there's only one specific part of the game, really. I mean, barring like really, really rare corner effects, that we can interact with an opponent. So, does it bother you personally that there isn't that kind of interaction as opposed to other games? So Jessi, we're going to come to you first on this one.
Not really. And I've gotten into discussions with other players about, why isn't there more interaction? Well, to me, this is a game where you form your strategy for the turn with the following turns in mind. And it is kind of one directional, but to me that's okay because in theory I have made a plan that you're going to have to deal with on your own turn. It's kind of like chess, it goes back and forth rather than I'm going to tell you can't move your king to that position.
So I think people might be frustrated by the fact that they aren't able to interact in the same way as other card games, because other card games certainly have said, you should be able to interact here, you can interact here, even though card games such as Hearthstone clearly minimize that kind of interaction. But I think it's that element of, oh, well, shoot, I really wanted this to happen, I wanted to be able to do something against that. People feel I guess cheated in a way whenever something happens and there's really nothing for them to do and the game kind of plays itself. At least I know that I've definitely experienced a kind of solitaire moment on the losing end of things where my opponent paid 6 stock, played 3 Musashis, and I'm sitting there at 3 and 5 going, oh wow, this is this is fun, quote unquote. But I mean, and the argument can be made this, this is just me being completely bitter about losing, and I think that could be. I know that Johnny sent in a question that we will get to that after about how one controls that. But Melanie, does it bother you about the level of interaction that you get?
This is really funny because I started out as a Magic player and I actually played Control. And so
boy.
going to Weiss was kind of a different experience. It doesn't really bug me quite so much because it when I first started playing, somebody taught me that Weiss is more of a game of reaction rather than action. And while I'm sure it'll open a whole discussion point here, I always felt like there was still plenty of ways to react to whatever my opponent was doing. It just doesn't always necessarily happen during your opponent's turn. And sometimes if you are familiar with your opponent's deck, you can kind of work around that. And for example, I'm a Nisekoi player, and so when Kantai throws down their anti-salvage, I just know that, I'm going to be using my red pendants a little bit more this game because it's main phase and gets around the battle phase anti-salvage. And I know that if I do light my Marika combo, I only need 1 out on the field, and I'm going to attack with her last because their anti-salvage trigger won't really matter at that point. So you still have ways to interact and react. It's just not necessarily, they did this on their main phase. Okay, well, I'm going to play something and deal with it right now. It's a little bit more delayed.
That's a fair point. No, I think I can definitely agree that it's less about taking a proactive stance on things than it is to just react. I know that I've definitely lost games myself trying to be too proactive and just being like, okay, I need to play out my CX combo first, getting my board wiped, and then thinking, oh, well, shoot, that wasn't that wasn't a really good sequence of plays. I mean, anybody that's watched the stream can probably attest to this, that I have certainly run myself into a brick wall before. more than once, but. So moving ahead with this, I would like to get to one of Johnny's questions: is how do you control the salt, right? Because I think we've seen that this game can be more dramatic in terms of its moments of super clutch cancels, that kind of thing. Because I mean, those that play Magic and have followed the Pro Tour scene for a while might remember the "oh my God, it's lightning helix" moment. Some people might think about professional poker, about this one guy who folded quads during the big one. But I mean, we get that kind of drama very regularly in our games, right? We all know what it's like to show down at level 3 and be like, oh my gosh, I'm at 3-3, he's attacking for 4, what do I do? Or, okay, she's at 3-2, I'm attacking for 5 3 times, let's go, right? And inevitably, we're going to hear, oh my God, somewhere, in the corner of the room. Somebody might slam a table or, throw their deck everywhere. But, I mean, we hope that this doesn't happen. But, I mean, I'm sure that everybody can relate. They know somebody or have heard of somebody who just cannot control the salt level. So, Melanie, how would you say you keep everything together if something goes really terribly during a game? What works for you to, I guess, keep that under control?
I have a really good friend who, when he plays Weiss, he evaluates how his deck does, not necessarily by how many times he wins or loses, but whether or not he got his opponent to level 3. And I asked him one time, I was like, well, why do you kind of think that way? And he's like, because sometimes the damage, the way the game goes and the way the damage either sticks or doesn't stick, doesn't always pan out into a win. Sometimes you get lucky and it does, and sometimes you don't. And it's not necessarily that he was thinking that it was all luck-based, but rather he was looking at his deck and the way he was playing and going, okay, the goal of this game is to get my opponent to level 4. If I got them to level 3, then you start asking yourself, did my deck do what I wanted it to do? Did I get what I needed to get to where I needed to go? And that's kind of his mindset. And I have to admit that I've adopted that a little bit too. And not maybe completely, but I kind of look at my decks and I go look at games and go, okay, did my deck do what it was supposed to do? Did I get my finishers out? Did I get my level 1 plus combo? Did I get my 0 utilities and were they actually in my hand? And with Weiss, and at least for me with playtesting, I tend to play a lot of games before I start making changes to a deck. And it's not because I don't want to, it's more because I feel that at that point, you have to play a couple of games to see what is actually wrong with it. Like, what is actually working, what is actually not working.
So what you're saying is you take a more analytical approach, and just by having that mindset, automatically you've already anchored or kind of, I guess, hedged your emotional reactions against, okay, there's an objective to this, and I'm exploring this for information as opposed to I'm going to just kind of shove all my emotional chips all in on this game. Is that would that be a fair point?
Yeah, that'd be a very fair point. And I kind of feel like if you can kind of look at it from that perspective, you don't get quite as salty. Now, everybody has games and weekends or sees a set or gets tired of playing a set or has things that upset them in this game sometimes. So it just is what it is. But then again, if I kind of look at other card games and consider back to when I played Magic, the same thing kind of happened over there. I mean,
yeah.
I think that's just, I hate to say it, it's part of playing card games. It's part of how card games work.
So let's then go to this other, I guess this really, really, really popular saying, and that I'd like us to tackle, is that all card games are pure luck. And we've heard this, there have been many a player in every game, right, that will claim that, X game is all luck, Y game is just 100% luck, Z game is all luck. And And I know from my perspective, I can say that I've tried to tell people that it's card games can't be 100% luck, because just by starting to know the rules of a game, right? If we just go back to the little chart here, where we know what the objective is, say in Weiss Schwarz, just by knowing that the objective is to get somebody to level 4, already that nuance has given you something that you need to know, and knowledge translates to skill. And the more you know, right, the more skillfully you'll be able to navigate a game. But, I think a lot of people take for granted, right, the fact that there is a lot of knowledge that's involved, and therefore there will be a lot of skill that needs to be tested in order to actually go through a game and to either win or lose. I mean, arguably it doesn't take very much skill to lose a game, but to actually play, right, it should take some degree of skill. Jessi, what do you think?
I agree. Usually when someone tells me that Weiss is a stacky game, I tell them to sit down and play me, and let's see how it goes. So that's usually my argument there, but...
Oh, wow. So you just take the really confrontational, okay, you think it's luck? Fight me. Let's go.
Pretty much. That's how I live my life. But in all seriousness, I like to say that there is an element of luck. At the end of the day, we're not playing chess. We don't have complete information. But I like to think that Weiss is about managing your luck. So knowing how compression works, you're taking the first step to not making it a luck-based game. Usually I find that newer players or less experienced players are typically the ones who most often think it's about luck. And then you kind of get the farther end of the spectrum, people who have been playing so long they're salted out of the game, they think that it's mostly luck, as they've just played too many +2 soul games, I guess. And it's true, we don't know what the shuffle is. We don't know the order of the cards in our opponent's deck, but you can calculate the odds, and so yes and no, it is about luck, and it's also not.
Right, it's about maximizing that, right?
Exactly.
Melanie, what do you think? Am I completely off base? Am I crazy, or do I have a point?
I agree with Jessi's take on it. It's not luck based. If you understand basic statistical math, and you don't even have to be really great at it. I'm just gonna throw this out there. I mean, you've taken the time, you've researched your cards, you've researched your set. You understand, like Jessi said, about the concept of compression. And then I think I'm going to throw one other thing in here too. I think you have to know your series' strengths and weaknesses. You have to know what sort of abilities and tech that you have in your set that is unique. Because each set, even though there are some people in the community that will argue that the sets are becoming more linear, that a lot of effects are getting, every set is getting this ability or that ability. There's some truth to that, but then I still feel like there are a lot of sets that just have some really great flavor to them. I'm going to use a set that I've been recently working with, the new Monogatari series. One of the characters, Tsubasa Hanakawa, they gave her some really cool cards that have scry effects. And they allow you to set up your deck and know what the top card and the bottom card is a little bit. And no, it's not if you're a Vanguard player, no, it's not Tsukiyomi. You're not going to cycle through your entire deck and know all of your stack. But at the same time, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your set, knowing what it's great at, knowing at what it needs help with and where you have to adjust that as a player, I feel like makes this less and less of a luck-based game. Sure, are you going to have matches that, you drew into all 8 of your climaxes the first 2 turns? That's just a shuffle problem, and that's just a bad game, and that happens. If it's happening every single game, then maybe I could understand you perhaps labeling it as all being luck. But really, honestly, if you look at it, it's more statistics and less luck.
Right, because over time, right, I mean, people, unless you, for some reason, have magnets attached to your climax cards that are just, magically appearing in your hand at all time, which is not good, by the way, don't cheat. But, it's over time, you should, on average, right, be around 50%, right? I mean, for most players, for the majority of players, we should be kind of 50-50, right, with winning and losing games. And that can mean that we see some games that are just freakishly bad, and we see some games that are just wonderful, right, where everything works and everything happens. And, if we track that trend over time, in general, we should see, at least for most players, and I'm not talking about like those that might be regularly winning top-level tournaments. I'm just talking about the rest of the 99.9% of players who just like playing will probably just see a trend that eventually evens out, right? Might have some really winning times and probably have some losing streaks as well. But I mean, it does that isn't to say that everything's luck. I mean, I definitely have had my, I guess, streaks where I just win a lot, and then if you've watched the stream, you'll know that I've been tossed right into the trash for at least this last few games, because just variance. So we have, if you've been with us for this whole time, you might have noticed that we have an interesting composition with our panel, because I am in a minority here. We have two girls that play the game. Woo! And this is a unique opportunity, I think, that we can talk about something like this, because in case you haven't figured out where I'm going with this, I am talking about girls that play WS, because if we've been looking at any other gaming community, right? I'm sure that those of us who are enjoying esports will also know that girls are a bit of a rarity, and no matter where you go, even in Magic or Hearthstone, etc., there's, I guess, this kind of attitude that people might have toward girls that play the game. Now, in my area where I am, right, I'm admittedly in a rather interesting area, right? That's very liberal, but by also extension very accepting. At least in my community, if we see a girl playing the game, it's it's like, oh, hey there, kind of thing, because we already know her, right? She's already one of our friends, and nobody bats an eye. If we see somebody that's like 9 years old playing the game, it's like, okay, cool, what are you playing? We just sit down and we play. There's no, I guess, fanfare about it. Nobody really makes any comments or remarks about that. But I'm curious to see what your experiences have been, Jessi and Melanie, with being a girl and playing this game, especially in your communities, because I know that you're not in California, for one. So Jessi, what has your experience been like, and what would you say to that?
Well, I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I, for the most part, have experienced nothing but overwhelming politeness from other players. In my area, I'm basically the only girl. I'm also the tournament organizer, so that probably colors my experience somewhat. Occasionally there will be someone who has an attitude or makes the odd, inappropriate comment, and I'm a fairly confrontational person, so it doesn't tend to last for very long. They don't tend to last for very long if the behavior continues, which I think has only happened one time. So I find that Weiss players in general tend to be very respectful, and especially when I've been to regionals and nationals, I've never had anyone be anything less than polite to me. And honestly, as a video gamer in the past, that really, really surprised me. The day I was in World Grand Prix Nationals, I was in my hotel room just shaking because I was so afraid of what was going to happen. But no, everybody was great. I think that probably the only thing that really sometimes troubles me are some of the art that you see, but I don't know, I haven't had anything so lewd that I'd have to ask somebody to not have it in public or something. But
so you wouldn't say that male gaze is perhaps a problem with the game, but you do notice that there is a lot of it on the cards.
Oh, absolutely. And it might be that their 2D is just so strong it doesn't affect me. So I don't know, but I would say that I have had a better experience than I would have thought. I work in tech, so I see all kinds of things happen, but I've had better experience at Weiss Schwarz events than I've had at tech conferences, if that says anything.
Oh, definitely. Because I mean, if I can just speak to, I mean, I'm not a girl, so I can't really speak personally to it. But I mean, I have a friend who is, she's an engineer. She's in the Bay Area, and I just hear about the horror stories that are very real, right? That, oh my gosh, these people just do nothing but they just can't help but look over my code one extra time, one more time than they would if if it was written by a guy, really. And it can be well, certainly very awkward. And I know I mean, this is not supposed to be a commentary on the on women in the tech field, but I mean, I can certainly attest to the challenges that I've at least seen now. It's not necessarily that it's. I'm not trying to make a completely blanket statement, so I'm kind of keeping myself a little bit more distant from that. This is just my very, very sneaky way of saying, please don't burn me to the ground for saying these things. It's like I don't mean this in any kind of mean way. I'm trying to illustrate a reality that at least women will have to deal with.
Well, touching on that a little bit, I will say that I've had, it's odd. I teach a lot of people the game, and people who've never played the game sometimes try and tell me how to play the game. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a gender thing because I'm generally the only one teaching the game. But sometimes it does feel that way. And
I mean, and before we get all the SJWs, commenting below, oh my God, how can you possibly talk about this? But.
Yeah, totally. I would love to see more women playing the game. Please, like, if you're in the southeast area, come to my tournament. We'll go get dinner. We'll have drinks. I don't care. Like, be my friend.
Melanie, so you're in, I guess, what we would consider the Midwest.
Yeah.
What's your experience been?
My experiences have all been really positive. I mean, I kind of always definitely knew I was in the minority. I remember my very first Weiss event was actually a Spring Fest.
Oh, wow.
Because at the time when I started playing, I didn't even know that there was a local shop where anybody was playing Weiss. And so I kind of taught myself watching some YouTube videos and reading some articles. And then I saw there was a Spring Fest at Origins that year, and I was like, which is in Columbus, Ohio, and where I'm from. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go try playing this. It's going to be terrible, but I'm going to go play. And I had a really positive experience. Nobody ever reacted or said anything because I was a girl. And I was really excited because I met another girl there who was playing Weiss. And still look up to her today for a lot of teaching and advice on the game. And from then on, I mean, I've always had very positive interactions with the community. I mean, I remember feeling really nervous and a little intimidated my first nationals because I'm looking around the room and it's almost all guys, but at the same time, nobody ever was rude to me. Everybody was polite and nobody ever said anything. And you didn't hear anybody saying, oh, well, you're playing a girl, so it should be easier or something like that. No one ever said anything like that in all my years playing Weiss. Locally, I mean, for the most part, I feel like we have a really strong community, and it doesn't matter whether you're a girl or a guy at all. I mean, people come to each other for your deck advice, card arguments, debates over the card of the day viability. I mean, but nobody really discredits anybody's opinion based off of that.
And I mean,
just so
that our listeners know, I mean, by contrast, Melanie is not somebody that I would consider a very confrontational person at all. I'm just gonna put that out there, just so that people know we do have a personality contrast here, not a conflict, but a contrast. And that Jessi will probably get in your face if you're wrong about something, and Melanie, well, I mean, she will educate you, but probably not getting in your face about it, right? Is this...
Well, most of the time, so there have been some heated shop debates.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure.
Well, sure. That's not to say that she doesn't have it in her. I'm just saying in general, right? We've all had our moments. So I think something that we can take away from what we've had just in this discussion here is that that WS is a bit of a charming game, right? We have seen that there are a lot of things that are different from I guess, quote, traditional card games and that are that others might be used to. For example, it definitely does not resemble Magic in a lot of ways that we would expect it to resemble other card games, and it certainly doesn't really look like Hearthstone or even Pokemon. I mean, it somehow, besides, sharing some of the mechanics, does not even look like Vanguard, right? But I think, would you both of you say that that's kind of the charm that draws us back to the game, and that, its unique facets are, kind of the draw?
I would say definitely.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. I always tell Weiss is a game of give and take. You're trying to level your opponent up to kill them, but it's also allowing them to play stronger cards. So it's all about balance, and it's beautiful because it's black and white. Those colors are, two opposites, and it's the whole point of the game.
Mm-hmm.
You want to hit them for a lot, but if you do, they're going to cancel. So it's all really cool.
Yeah, and besides the whole aspects of the game that make it unique, that is what keeps us coming back. It's also just a celebration of the culture that really surrounds what it's all about. Japanese animation, anime, that kind of thing. Because I think that there's one very common thread that keeps us all together here, right? That we all enjoy anime. I have yet to run into a Weiss player that absolutely hates anime, right? I mean, it's like, oh, well, all anime is garbage and nobody should watch it, said no Weiss player ever, right? I mean, have you ever run into a player that absolutely despises anime yet plays the game but still plays the game? I haven't. In my many years of playing the game, which has been like, 3 now at least, I have yet to run into somebody who absolutely hates anime, period.
I've never run into anybody like that. And I think it's kind of nice because it creates, we already have a little bit of a common bond in the community because we do like anime and we do care about our series and that, and I think it lends to the player base.
Jessi, have you ever run into anybody like that? I'm just curious now.
No, not at all. Maybe some people are more knowledgeable about anime than others. Maybe somebody's just played a Persona game or something, especially on the English side.
Sure.
But no, it's mostly just my waifu's better than your waifu all day, every day.
And I think one of the, I guess, most interesting positive or upsides is that, for whatever reason, and we're not trying to analyze why it is, but the game certainly, at least the community certainly seems to be more open to girls playing the game than others might be, or it just might be the aspect of the community, could be the game itself. I'm definitely not going to try to speak for everybody one side or the other, and I know that I'm already tracking on thin ice by saying this, but I think that it's a unique advantage that we might have by having such a given special community, in that by default we really do enjoy anime, or at least the things around it, and that there's no getting around that. If you're going to play this game, it's because you enjoy your series or any series in general, or that's the thing that kind of brings everybody together. Maybe it's that. I don't know for sure if that's one of the things that makes it more friendly to everybody in general, but there are certainly those factors in place that I think could play into it, and I think that's really cool. It certainly makes for I guess a much more friendly environment, especially that I've noticed in my area, versus other games. And I'm not saying that to put down any other card game or anything. I'm just saying that it's a unique upside that we have. Did you two want to say anything to that? Well, before somebody burns down my house for saying the wrong thing.
I think that because Weiss is based in anime and video games to a certain extent, I think that is more approachable to people, especially outside of the TCG community. Most of the players at my shop, anyway, I happened to recruit them at a local anime con and just harassed them until they came and played in tournaments. And they had never played a card game before. I taught them that day. Not all of them, but some of them. And some of them have since branched out into other games. But at the end of the day, they connect with the set that they picked, especially the first one. They might choose a more competitive set later on. But to me, I always think there's something special about the first set that you go for when you learn the game, because generally it's something that you genuinely like. And at the end of the day, you had fun looking at your favorite characters, and especially the Weiss mechanics of very flavorful interactions. You did cool things. It's always fun.
Melanie, thoughts?
I think that it's one of the things that kind of ties the community together, and I feel like I very much agree with Jessi. I remember being drawn to the game because of the anime art, and I feel like if you kind of talk to people, you kind of get an impression that that's very much the same thing for them too. They've got their favorite series that they absolutely love, and they play them all the time, whether or not they're really super competitive or not. And they might buy a set or two just because they like how it runs or how it works. But for the most part, I mean, I know most of our local people are pretty passionate about the anime sets or the video game sets that they play. And it really kind of just draws together the community.
Well, great. I mean, so this is probably not going to be the end of discussion for this topic, though we are pretty much out of time for today. There's still very many things that we could go on about, I'm sure. So, if you want to join in on the discussion, or if you have other questions, please leave a comment in the video below, and we'll talk again. I mean, I think that this is a very good start to it, but I think that there's still more to be said. And I think that the dialogue should be kept open, especially pertaining to all the things that we covered, because the game will change, the player base will evolve, and it's just going to get bigger and better, I think. So, as I was saying, we're all out of time for today. Thank you for listening. I'd like to thank Melanie and Jessi for joining us today on the panel. Once again, this was sponsored by Card Academy. Please be sure to check out our sponsors at thecardacademy.net for all of your Weiss Schwarz singles and supply needs. This has been Michael from 9th CX, and thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.